6th. And we're going to change the order here a little bit so Dana can get back to her classroom. So we are going to go to the math presentation first.
Yeah, thank you. And I will kind of take the lead on it a little bit. Dana and I had talked a little bit, well, we talked a lot about this, but just a little bit about our presentation this morning. And I will take the lead and she will dive in on any mathematical questions that she will be better at answering than I am. Just wanted to give you a bit of an update about our current work that's being done in the high school math department. I'm gonna just project the why, when, how, so folks can see that. As you know, the math department underwent a review of curriculum
Join the meeting.
Has adopted open up curriculum. Through that process, they did an analysis of the Wisconsin standards for mathematics. And in particular, we're taking a look at the third credit option at the high school for math. So a typical sequence of courses a student might take would be algebra, geometry, and then advanced algebra. In our district, we refer to that as advanced algebra. Some districts refer to that as algebra 2. And what they're finding is that curriculum adoption, as we knew, was going to be addressing some more rigorous instruction. And what they were finding, and what actually a lot of people across the country are finding, is there's some overlap in the standards between advanced algebra and pre-calculus. Sometimes students go algebra, geometry, advanced algebra, pre-calculus in their 4 years in high school. And so when they were examining that, they were also thinking about other options that they have currently for a third credit in math. And right now we also offer something called elementary algebra as a third credit. And they were noticing that that credit is not as rigorous and is not able to support students in success for career and college standards. And so they kind of set forth to determine what do we want to offer for our students for this third credit of math. They felt really, really strongly that they were maintaining a really high level of rigor for the third credit. They wanted to make sure that they were supporting students' career and college endeavors. They want to talk about covering all of the standards without overlap between those classes. They don't want to have overlap between that advanced algebra and the pre-calculus. They also feel like it's important for students to have choice and to specialize in an area that they may be most interested in. So right now what they are doing is they are working through a process to update what that third credit in math might look like. Again, this is just a for your information type presentation so that we can answer any questions and concerns and so that we can be sure to address those moving forward before we would bring up formal proposal here to the board. Right now, their draft is looking at that third credit of math and dividing it essentially into 2 semesters or 2 trimesters, if you will. All students would take advanced algebra 1, so that same first semester. And then for the second semester, they'd have the option to sort of specialize between what we're calling advanced algebra DS, data science, or advanced algebra FA, which would be functions and analytics. And that data science is a piece that is probably something you've heard about in the news. It's a sort of up and coming piece in a lot of careers throughout the country. The data science is generally preparing students for AP statistics, whereas the functions and analytics would prepare kids for AP pre-calc and or AP calculus along the way. And so what they're working on right now is just figuring out which standards would go in each semester and how those would build towards future rigorous courses at the high school level. The third thing that they would like to do is eliminate that option in the third credit of elementary algebra. We used to offer that in the past as a dual credit class with Madison College. Madison College is no longer allowing anyone to offer that as a dual credit class. And so at this point, we don't want that as an option. We feel like making students or having students in the advanced algebra course will make them better prepared for either career or their college endeavors. Dana, how am I doing so far? Okay, good. There's a lot of next steps that they need to work through, and I just want to make sure that our board is aware of what those are. They're really working on identifying the standards in each course, and so it's a realistic and a trimester schedule. Really working on the communication piece, the counseling department, our ACP coordinator, our advanced learning coordinator, to make sure that we're building awareness among staff, who and then obviously among students as well. And then working on what that course sequencing might look like between advanced algebra and then the data and statistics and the functions and analytics piece. Working on those staffing implications as well. What will that mean for course requests? Who can teach which courses? Any changes that we would make, obviously, would bring here to the ed services and then to the full board. We're looking at any changes would be brought here in late fall, early winter. And then that would be for implementation in the 26-27 school year. At that same time, if they were moving forward with dropping that elementary algebra course, it would come at that same time. And then they do want to also examine any curriculum materials that might support that change. Any changes to the curriculum, obviously, we would bring to the school board to for a formal adoption. So I will open it up to questions. I know Diana had emailed some questions as well, and I'm willing to read those in and we can respond to that. She did say, what is the impact on honors courses? And she reiterated that she was not in favor of eliminating honors math courses. We have discussed that a little bit, and I think the idea would be that we would maybe continue to offer an honors course that would be a sequence that would be advanced algebra honors, and it would include essentially the standards that would be addressed in all three of those courses, but in 2 semesters, so that the pace would be more rigorous and it would cover more content in that at a higher level. That's still in the planning phases of that, and I do know that we anticipated Diana might ask that question too. She did say, how does advanced algebra 1 differ from advanced algebra with the data science and the functions and analytics? And I think that that's a real crosswalk in the standards to be able to differentiate between those 2 separate courses, and we can bring more information about that too. And then she said, if advanced algebra 1 covers data statistics and functions and analytics, why move into 2? Is this a better track for honors and let honors remain as it is? And I think I would ask her for some additional clarification with that question, because I'm not sure if I fully understand what she means there. Dana, is there anything you would like to add to that?
I'm a little unclear on that. Also, advanced. Yeah, could you read it again?
Yeah, it says if advanced algebra 1 currently covers data and statistics and functions and analytics, why move it into 2? Is this a better track for regular and let honors remain as is? And I think that's kind of what we were saying, is that we would allow honors to try to cover essentially what would be in those 3 courses in a 2 trimester sequence.
Yeah.
Okay.
Jenny, can you hear me, Jenny?
You are here, Diana. Yes.
Yeah, as I'm in travel, my travel, excuse me, to my dad's, the internet is very spotty, so I may cut out, I may lose you. That's why I wanted to get all of that to you ahead of time. With that question, I just wanted to state or wanted to have clarification. You're dividing a course into 2 pieces, and with that, making sure that there's nothing lost, to make sure that that all kids have what they need moving forward. If they have to choose, if there's a fork in the road and they have to choose between A and B, right? What standards are they losing to make sure that they're still successful for those next stages. What I'm understanding, and I could be wrong, you know, as we just took a quick look at it, I'm understanding that you're taking a current course and kind of splitting it in half. So unless a kid chooses the honors course, and I think you've stated pretty clearly that if you're in that honors track, that those standards would be upheld, they would get all of those. My question then is for that, and let's say the honors track is the top, what, maybe the 20%, you know, what about the next tier down of kids? And I don't like using up and down because I'm not minimalizing them at all, but you understand what I'm saying is you've got this group of kids that may not know yet what they want to do, and they may not be in that honors track, but you were asking them to choose that fork in the road, A and B in classes. Are they going to be missing out on essential standards that are needed in that career path, whatever they choose? Because basically you're taking that third year course and you're having them choose part A or part B. Does that make sense? I don't know if I clarified it or made it more confusing.
I understand it better. Yeah, we are offering them choice. The way the Wisconsin math standards are set up is that, we have first 2 year standards, which all students must have. And those standards are embedded in our algebra and geometry course, and we've been going through a standards deep dive to make sure that all of the first 2 year standards are being met and addressed. And then the rest of the standards are kind of optional. They must be embedded within at least one of our courses, but the students do not need all of those standards. So we need to offer them all, but they don't need to take them all. And really the only way they would see all of them is to take all of our math courses, which is not possible for most students, just
No.
schedule-wise.
What you just said is what you just said is very clarifying, at least for me, you know, that, okay, what you offered, the required standards, are hit.
Yes.
Is it the other ones are optional, or the other ones are more extension? Because extension and optional are different. I know with middle school standards, elementary school standards, you have the essentials and then you have your extension ones. Extension doesn't necessarily mean optional. So can you provide a little clarification there, please?
I mean, I'm not a standards expert, but we've been working with, Molly Rilling from CISA for the last 2 years. And she's really been coaching us through this process. And I don't know if the state would use the word optional, but yes, they are optional. They are not extensions. They need to be offered, but not all students will take all third year standards.
Got it. Thank you.
Yeah, I would say, Diana, though, the one thing I can add to that is those year 1 and 2 standards are standards that most every student would need for basic graduation standards. The standards after that are standards that put you on whatever life, career, military path that you're choosing. And those become the classes that are starting to gear towards their college and career pathway. So again, optional, but not optional for the pathway you want to be on. They're the ones that are going to be required for the pathway you're on, but they're not required for graduation. Does that help you?
Yeah. And their examples and their explanation was great. Thank you.
Yep.
And I do want to add that, while data science might lead towards stats, if they took data science, they would still be prepared for pre-calc if they choose the other path afterwards. So we want to make it so that, no matter what second half class they take for their third year, they can take whatever fourth year class they want. They won't be missing anything in preparation for either of those classes.
Or both.
Or both,
If they're in
yeah,
interest.
some doing both, yeah.
Sam, Greg, any questions?
Yeah. I guess it pertains to an honors. Offering, like advanced algebra. Are. Is that just, like, I think I understand what you were saying is that that's going to be more of a condensed or accelerated class. Based on the standards that were offered, in those other standalone math courses. Do we also have like an AP? I don't know if we have AP algebra or. Well, that doesn't make any sense.
The lowest level AP class we currently offer, that is currently offered in the College Board series, is AP Pre-Calc.
AP pre-calc.
Yeah, so we offer AP Pre-Calc, AP Calc, and AP Stats, and AP Calc 2, basically. So we have 4 AP math classes.
So we've never, have we ever explored the concept of keeping advanced algebra, just advanced algebra, and then offer honors courses for the AP courses only?
So
I mean,
You mean only offer AP as our honors and
Yeah.
everything else is regular?
right,
The math team has explored that and we are open to that, but we are also respecting if the board decides we want to keep honors, that we would keep honors.
yeah, and then I think that's probably a discussion for a different day, but like, honors being. I think there's a discussion there to be had about exploring the way that our district approaches honors. In general, and because I think there's value in having, children across the spectrum, participating in each level of class. So that they, can impart some, good wisdom, I guess, along other kids that may be having the similar questions but aren't able to articulate them. So. Yeah, anyway,
thanks, Craig, and I appreciate your answer. I know that that is something that the high school math department is interested in exploring as well, but as Dana said, is respectful of the direction that the board would like to go there. So I appreciate that answer.
Okay,
Yeah, I do not have any questions. The one question I have is already answered, so.
Diana, anything?
Nope, she hit mine. Thank you.
Well, then we can move on to the director update.
All right. Yes, you are good. Thank you, Dana. Very much appreciate your time. Good. All right, the director update, we have 2 topics outlined on the director update, and we'll start with the first topic. I did add to the update elementary literacy review update. We did include a document because I know some folks have not necessarily had the joy of all of the Act 20 updates that we've been given over the years. And so just a brief overview of some of the Act 20 requirements and how the district has addressed those. You can see, and I won't read through each one of them, but a key piece of that Act 20 was teacher training. I'm proud to report that our teachers have wrapped up their Keys to Literacy course. It was very much focused on early literacy instruction. So really key pieces in phonics, phonemic awareness, translating kind of the code, if you will, of reading, with also some emphasis on vocabulary instruction and comprehension. This was quite an ambitious endeavor, if I will be honest with you. And I remember about 18 months ago, sitting with the coaches going, are we gonna get this done? And I'm very proud to report that we have not only finished up the online portions of that training for our elementary teachers, but that our coaches have done their facilitated sessions as well. I think it was very, very well received, and has helped our teachers continue to make a shift in their literacy or instruction in the classroom. A shift that we began with the science of reading, many years ago here in the district, but that was definitely supported. Our administrators who are principals, and also Desha, who serves as our district reading specialist, also needed to take a administrator course. That was also required by Act 20. And those need to be complete by July 1 of this year, and we will meet that deadline as well. You'll hear a little bit more this afternoon about, or this afternoon, hopefully we're not gonna be here this afternoon. We might need to order some more pizza if that's the case. Later this morning about our early literacy assessment update and our personal reading plans. As you know, we were working on personal reading plans for any student who scored below the 25th percentile in certain areas on that Ames Web Plus literacy screening, and we'll have an update for you about that. Another key piece of that legislation was the prohibited use of the 3 queuing instruction. We did remove any reference to and have been emphasizing with our teachers that in the fall of 2024 to be in alignment with that. That being said, when we did an analysis of our data, we did want to start looking at additional resources as it related to our elementary literacy curriculum, and did a review of many different sets of materials that were recommended by the state legislature committee as well as DPI, and did recommend HMH into reading as the core curriculum. If you remember that HMH into reading was one of them on the state approved list, and there is some opportunity, I won't give any odds on it, of receiving some additional funds back from the state for the purchase of those materials. But some of that is caught in some different political wrangling at the state level that I have absolutely no control over. And so that's just kind of a brief review. There are other pieces as well, as we've talked through the retention policy and some of that summer intervention piece at the policy committee too. But I did want to just start there with a bit of a brief overview. I do know that I have heard there have been some concerns expressed about the adoption and the adoption process. And I just wanted to bring this to the Ed Services Committee to see if there was some additional information that I could bring or our team could bring to better answer some of those questions and or concerns before continuing to move forward with that process and that adoption. And so I guess now is my chance to sort of open the floor and address any of those questions or concerns, or Dr. Burke, if you have anything that you would like to add. Just put you on the spot there, didn't I?
No, you didn't put me on the spot at all. I just know that when we bring a material on board, right? We want to make sure that we've done a thorough vetting and that we have everything that we need to make sure that our board and our community are comfortable with that, because it's a big input, right? And we as educators, we don't want to be fighting headwinds of our board or our community as we're bringing those things on board. So it's best for us to clear up any conversation or discussion points that maybe haven't been finalized or clear, even though it was brought to a vote. And so we can take a pause. We can say, hey, are those questions still lingering out there? Because rather have them answered than for us to move forward and have a split decision on a board that continues for the next decade as we implement the material, right? It's just not worth it. So having the conversation now where we can pause and have that and talk about where we need to be is probably better.
Okay, Sam.
Yeah, so and you know, this was brought up at the last board meeting that we had by myself. And the concern that I had about it when I was looking into HMH into reading, and it's certainly not particular to HMH's curriculum. But the concern that I had was that HMH, in a number of releases that they've made, have made it clear that they support implementing social activist causes in their curriculum. They talk about making sure that they use culturally responsive techniques in teaching, and other forms of pedagogy that, or the fact that HMH is baking those kinds of ideas into their curriculum. I suppose. I know that's a very broad question to start out with, but that's, I guess, opening up.
Yeah, thank you, Sam, and I know you had expressed that previously. I guess my thought or reflection as I think about that is bringing it back to the materials that we have here in the district and how we're using the materials here in the district. And I would ask if there are particular parts of that set of materials that bring question to you, or you are wondering about, I'm happy to address those. And again, same if it's about the implementation in one of the classrooms as well. I would just ask that you bring that to my attention and then we work through that on a local level. It's really hard for me to address anything that happens at Houghton Mifflin. They don't necessarily give me that power here from Watertown. But I certainly can help address any concerns about like local implementation or the local materials that we are moving to adapt to. I know that I'm always open, and I know our teachers are always open to having board members in classrooms to see instruction, to look through materials. There's certainly nothing that is not open for you to look at or ask questions of, and we'd be happy to address those specific instances. And if there are some of those, I'd be happy to work with you to address those and take a look at that too.
Yeah, I suppose I don't know what the long term looks like entirely. I do think that there's probably going to be other board members who would like to get in on that discussion at a board level. Some of the newly elected board members I know would very much like to talk about HMH into reading. I think that we probably need to be looking at the curriculum that we're adopting as a district, and we need to be taking extra care moving forward to ensure that we're not working with groups that are promoting that sort of ideology, and that are, we don't want to work with groups that are open about promoting that ideology, certainly if they're wearing it on their face. That's something that I would find probably to be moving in the wrong direction.
Are there specific pieces of the resource that you have concerns about at this point?
Yeah, I've talked a few times about pedagogical techniques that are utilized oftentimes and that are recommended. And when HMH talks about, here, let me see if I can pull up the notes that I had previously from that last meeting. When they talk about implementing culturally responsive texts, when they talk about bringing these elements in, I don't know if maybe we'll find it right off the bat. Yeah, when they're talking about utilizing those elements, the difficulty is that oftentimes those elements on their face are not super explicit, but they are, like I said, kind of baked into the philosophy of the education, to create opportunities for discussion within the classroom. And that becomes a lot more complicated. Wish I could find it. I know I had it pulled up previously. Yeah, I think these things are a little bit more complex than being able to say, oh, here's a clear example. I brought it up a few times now at a couple of different meetings, primarily at services meetings when we're talking about the curriculum, but also in educational practices. And the issue comes in stochastic entry points for discussion in other areas. And this is a policy item that I brought up when speaking at the policy board in the past. But I think that it's best for us not to work with companies that explicitly state that they are using those philosophies when they're creating their curriculum. If we're working with companies that are creating curriculum and they are talking about how they are baking diversity, equity, and inclusion into their curriculum, that means that even if we don't see it on its face, it is in there somewhere. They're telling us that they're putting it in there. Just because we can't immediately identify it because it's in the weeds, I don't think that that's a good standard for us to have moving forward. We can certainly comb through and look at every single page of that curriculum. But again, I mean, this is a long process. This is something that we've been moving towards for a while. I think that moving forward, the key is going to be having access to that curriculum at an earlier date and having access to a greater level of detail about the curriculum at an earlier date. So that's what I would ask for. In a similar vein, when we're talking about the professional development for Act 20 with AIM pathway and keys to literacy, if we could be provided with information about the courses that the administrators and teachers took for those. It says Pathway to Literacy Leadership course. I know that AIM pathway has a number of courses. Was that the only course that administration took?
I think, yes, but we should stick to the one topic of the material selection. You just went in another direction on some of the
Sure.
you know.
Yeah, no, what it comes down to at the end of the day is the opportunity for board members, especially new board members, to be able to look over that material in greater detail.
Okay, and my response will be, and I understand that you say that it's difficult to find specific examples.
Mhm.
On my end, it's difficult for me to respond to concerns that we can't find specific examples to.
Mhm.
And I guess that's the challenge that we face. I think you had started your statement by saying it would be difficult to find materials that don't have this somewhere on their website. And so I guess for me, anytime that any one of our community members, family members have a concern about instruction or curriculum, bringing that to the classroom teacher, bringing that to the principal, bringing that to myself, is the best way for us to address those concerns in the moment and then to make those changes. And it's like I said, it's hard without specific examples to address that. I did see, Dan, that Diana had her hand up. It is down now, so I don't know if she's able to respond right now or not.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. No, I just had a question going on to Sam's because that question came up, and thanks, Sam, for reiterating again, like you did at the board meeting, talking about DEI and talking about culturally responsive. My understanding as an educator, those are two different things. While there have some similarities, they're distinctly different. I don't know if now is the time or if in the future, Jenny, is the time. If you could give a little bit of difference, because culturally responsive, that's something that educators through their evaluation program have been basically asked to do to make sure that we are not just hitting the white Caucasian, whatever, kind of like those old Dick and Jane books kinds of things, that we have more ethnicities within our classroom to be understanding of that. So without getting too deep into that, Jenny, is there a quick minute or two explanation you can give that talks about the difference? Because I don't want them to be used synonymously because they're not the same.
Diana, will you repeat again, culturally responsiveness compared to
DEI.
Compared to DEI. I guess I appreciate that point. I mean, when we look at culturally responsiveness, we're looking at ensuring that the materials are something that would be engaging to our students, materials that would be talking about things that would be of interest, that would catch their attention, their imagination. And then I guess I would ask the board for a definition of the areas of concern with DEI. I feel like DEI is used quite broadly. And I want to make sure that I am addressing exactly what the concerns are of the board when it relates to DEI. Diversity, equity, and inclusion. When I think about inclusion, a huge piece of our special education law is based on inclusive practices. And so I think having a better definition of DEI and then how that relates to like concerns in the classroom would be helpful for us moving forward.
Yeah, I certainly think that one of the big issues that we face is the ambiguity of language when it comes to terms like diversity, equity, and inclusion. Once again, the reason that I bring up the connection between cultural responsiveness and DEI is because in HMH's response to, quote, lessons in inequity and evaluation of cultural responsiveness in ELA curriculum, they state that they ensure cultural responsiveness. Here, I'll read the quote again. HMH materials undergo a rigorous review process for ensuring cultural responsiveness, led by our Chief Equity and Inclusion Officer and our Office of Equity and Inclusion. So it's clear that HMH considers cultural responsiveness to be a subsection or a focus of their equity and inclusion office, right? Like I've talked about in the past, when we hear the phrase equity, and especially when we're using it in terms of cultural responsiveness, we're talking about racial or ethnic equity. We're talking about cultural equity. Equity is the practice of taking social capital and moving it from one group to another. They're trying to implement essentially cultural socialism. It's functionally the same thing. So my concern is that if we're working with a company that is filtering all of their material through their Office of Equity and Inclusion, I don't think that we are using something that is politically neutral. I think that we're using material in curriculum that is going to have this process going on throughout being fed throughout the entire curriculum. That's going to have these elements fed all throughout. The problem is when it's mixed in that thoroughly, oftentimes you can't pick it out because it's it's evenly distributed.
So if I may, just as a point of understanding, cultural responsive teaching, right, and having cultural responsive materials, talks a lot about just connecting with the students' culture, language, visual representations of people like them, and so on. That's not what you're having a beef with. But what you are having a beef with is if it pulls towards a social inequity, utilizing those connections to culture, language, visual representations, and whatever, that skews it to a place of inequities. Is that right?
Well, it depends on what you mean by inequity. And this is where some of the problem comes in, because you've got exoteric and esoteric meanings of words like equity, inequity, inclusion, diversity. All of these things become very difficult to talk about because people are using different meanings while using the same words.
Same as DEI, right?
So yeah, whether it's DEI, whether it's a great deal of things. And that's why it's my proposal to anyone who works in these areas, anyone who promotes these things, these confusing, ambiguous, and suspicious areas, anyone who's filtering their entire curriculum through their Office of Equity and Inclusion, we should probably not work with companies that are doing that. We should probably look for companies that are staying away from that entirely. I don't think that's where the wind is blowing in America. I don't think that's where the wind is blowing in Watertown's school district. I think it's dangerous. And I understand we're at the end of a road with our Act 20 updates, and we're at the end of the road with what curriculum we're using. But this could end up being a serious problem. What I would propose is that we get together, either a subcommittee or some other kind of group, and we go through the curriculum in detail. If you can provide, whoever that subcommittee would be, with copies of the curriculum.
So what you're saying is, as we move forward with implementation, making sure we stay ahead of the implementation with a thorough review of each,
Mhm.
each
That would
grade
be,
level and the materials that are used,
yeah,
just so we're not confusing the difference between just talking about customs and languages and so on, and keeping that away from like some of the social.
some of the more politicized
Right,
elements. is how I would put it, yeah.
political, social.
Yeah.
Discussion points that could arise from.
Yeah. Mhm.
Okay.
And, I mean, maybe as we're going through there, maybe we get a better handle on what we're dealing with, and then maybe we have further discussion.
I think
But
that's
where I
exactly
would
what
put
Jenny was proposing when she said, if there are specifics,
Mhm.
and if there are specifics that we find.
Yeah.
Or whatever.
I just think it would need to be a little bit more structured than like, oh, well, if a parent has, if a parent comes up with something and brings it to us, I think that if we can be a little bit more proactive about that, it's probably for the best. So, and I'm always looking for ways to, at the very least, not leave everything on your guys' plate. If,
Exactly.
like I said, if we can do a subcommittee, if me and another board member or two can start going through that, I think that would be a great start.
Absolutely.
Mhm.
I know, it was asked and shared to have logins for all of the board members into the curriculum, and that was shared, I believe, after Ed Services in March. And so if you want to go back and take a look at that login, that should give you the opportunity to start, taking a look at that information. If there's additional resources you'd like to take a look at, that would be great. Dan, I know you got the opportunity to sit into a classroom and take a look at some materials too. I don't know if you have any impressions you'd like to share or thoughts from that.
Well, the only criticism I had of the materials was that it seemed pretty rigorous for third grade. And if there were when I was teaching ninth grade, if the eighth grade teachers were following that, I'd be very happy to receive their students. So I don't know if every kid in the classroom can pick up all of that, but I've always believed we teach to the top and have everybody else rise up to that. So I liked what I saw.
I appreciate that, and I know how much time our board members dedicate to many of the activities, but I appreciate the time that you took with that. And I think that is one area of across the district you're gonna find is sort of that idea of increased rigor. We heard it this morning from our math department at the high school, and I think that's something that we feel a high level of urgency about too. So I definitely appreciate that.
Diana, anything?
No, she's still on mute, so oh, nope, she unmuted.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Nope, I'm good. Jenny, I don't have my questions in front of me. Did I have
No.
any for that one? I don't think I did.
Yeah, you had one, sorry. Will the items be here by early mid-June so teachers can have time to prep if desired over the summer and for summer PD as needed? I appreciate the question, Diana. At this point, because I was asked to pause, I'm uncertain as to when the materials would be arriving. I'm certainly eager to be in touch with them again to start moving forward with that. But I again want to make sure that we're addressing the concerns of the board before we do that.
Great.
Here's a brief synopsis of the concerns that I have with this whole process. One, and other board members observed this and I mentioned this to them also, that when asked at the board meeting about data, there was not any comparative data that was presented. I think that's pretty much an essential when it comes to a curriculum selection process, and that's a concern of mine. It was very unclear as to whether or not, it was very unclear what criteria the committee or the group was utilizing as a rubric by which to select a particular curriculum. It indicated that, perhaps maybe we were following the Act 20 requirements, but that's only one part of the criteria. The rest of the criteria would be, how it's being effective in our buildings. And that I feel was, drastically, underplayed or even missed altogether. The time frame I was uncomfortable with. I felt very rushed. I felt like there was, a lot that got missed in that discussion. As far as Sam's concerns, as far as Dan's concerns when it comes to, that process. I heard mention that, access to the content of the curriculum that was given to the board pretty much, within a week or two of the actual board meeting. That doesn't seem to me like an adequate time for a board to, review and also raise any particular questions they may have when it comes to the curriculum. Because after all, when we're making a selection, we want to make sure that it's a good selection for many years to come, not just in that particular moment. So as a board member, I'm thinking, I have to feel confident that we're making the best possible selection decision moving forward. And I didn't feel that way based on the time frame. Then I did, so again, that plays into the transparency around the process of the curriculum selection. The updates that are coming forward to this particular committee, I like to think that I attend this committee fairly regularly, and yet it seemed like those types of discussions in that process weren't shared with the committee at a very high level as far as what the curriculum selection group was looking at for criteria, how it was being comparative, and how that all fits in to plan for the presentation recommendation for the board. That was missing. I feel that there was the lack of vertical integration and involvement with regarding the middle school in that alignment process. I think that's a very critical piece, especially when we're considering that this is a school district, not just an elementary level curriculum selection. It has everything to do with how we go forward from elementary to the middle school and then also to the high school. So is it realistic to say maybe we should have some high school involvement in that? Sure. I don't know how critical that is when we already have a curriculum in place at the middle school, but definitely, if we're looking at an overall district-wide ELA program, where's that discussion? I think there should be one. The dual language component, it was indicated as a component that seemed to rule out other curriculum, like wit and wisdom. However, so if it rules out other curriculum as a contender, and yet we're utilizing wit and wisdom in an ELA capacity at the middle school that doesn't utilize dual language. So why is it all of a sudden something that we're shying away from in this curriculum selection? That would be another question. That didn't seem to have a very strong argument for one way or another. There was no strong argument when it came as to why the wit and wisdom didn't qualify for the Act 20 reimbursement that we were talking about. It just seemed like, okay, we made a decision in a direction. And then we didn't really provide a lot of other reasons why, other curriculum shouldn't be, included or compared to, in our study. So that just seems like, okay, we like this, we're gonna go after this, and you need to make this decision because we said so. That's what it feels like from a board member standpoint. And that's how I feel like that's very uncomfortable. So I think that there's enough questions for me as a board member to say, hey, why don't we have this discussion at the full board level? Because I do think we have new board representatives that may share some concerns in that respect. But also, perhaps maybe there needs to be further study, curriculum, study of other options, and to see if we can provide some of these, answer to some of these concerns. Because I think that those are critical for me to make sure that we're making a confident decision moving forward. When the board looks forward at this information, from a longitudinal data standpoint, the last thing I want to be doing as board member is questioning, this decision right now. I'd rather say, hey, we did a darn good job of making sure that we did everything we possibly can, make the best possible selection. I don't want to be questioning that information moving forward. So those are my concerns.
So if I can reiterate what I heard is you had a large number of concerns about process along the way. And I know that, when we hear that, right, we tend to ask ourselves, well, along the way, where were some of those thoughts or questions, right? Because there was a good 6, 7, 8 months to have some of those thorough conversations. For instance, when we put the committee together, right, there wasn't a middle schooler on that. That went to the board for approval. You know, I was in charge of having that come to the board for approval. I saw the list. I didn't question it. You voted on it. At that time, didn't question it. But along the way, when those concerns popped up in either head, right, they weren't discussed until the moment of decision. So there is some discussions within our processes together that we all own, right? That I'm a little concerned about. Should we move to any other curriculum decisions that we move forward on? And that's good for us to review, like your list here of things that we could have done better in the process along the way, right? So that we don't do those again next time. My question is like, how many of those do you feel like we need to rectify and or work on to move forward with the decision that was made by the board to adopt? You know, because I agree with you, Craig. There's other things along the way that we could have vocalized better as committee members, board members, administrators, that led us to this uneasy feeling. But I'm not worried about what happened in the past, only to learn from it and not repeat. But I am interested in what do you need, or what do you feel like you need, or other board members might need moving forward, and maybe that's a discussion at the full board level. But I'm keenly interested in where you are with this, because if you are not at the let's move forward point, if you're at the all stop point, or extending an evaluation of material or whatever else, I want to hear what it is you're looking as an outcome for.
All of the above is what I feel is important to have answers to.
What is all of the above? Everything you listed?
Everything I just mentioned. So, and as well as, I'm at the all stop until.
So are you looking at restarting the process anew? Or
So, I mean, personally, personally, my concerns would be along the lines of, questions I have. You know, if it just so happens that HMH, after this process shakes out, that is the best selection. I definitely would like to hear that from everybody at the table that should be involved in that process, including middle school. I feel that, there's just too much here that we need to.
Can we go through your questions one at a time, and there may be some answers that weren't asked, or either along the way through Ed Services or a finale, when the board made the decision, because I do believe that that decision, right, the discussion around that decision was a little truncated, right? We didn't have as much of a full discussion that night, and we went right to a vote. And so maybe, through the process of answering some of these questions, if there are answers to them, right, you may have some of the answers you need, and we don't have as extensive of a process that you think we may have ahead of us. So, can you start with question number 1 that you have?
Why was there a lack of comparative data?
Okay, so.
I'm happy, I kind
yep.
of took notes as he spoke, and Craig, I'm happy to address those concerns.
Okay, but let's do them one at a time. Let's
Yeah,
one question
okay.
at a time, right?
Do you mind? I took good notes, and I will do my very best to represent what you were saying. I have about 6 points, and I'm happy to kind of go through point by point. And if you have questions, please ask, Craig. There is nothing here that we are trying to move forward hastily with. There's nothing here that we are trying to do in a way that does anything but support the kids and the teachers in our district. And I want to be like super clear about that. And I want to make sure that you get the answers to the questions that you have, because I think we have some answers to that. I don't know that I have every single answer. I don't know that any process will give me every single answer, really, truly, honestly. But I appreciate your concerns, and I certainly want to address them, okay?
So Jenny.
Yes.
When you said you have 6 points, you have 6 points on the data piece?
No.
Okay, so what I'm saying is.
Do we need to order pizza?
No, what I'm saying though is that we should go through each question on its own merit, right? And just,
Yep.
just as try to keep us orderly, because otherwise,
Absolutely.
we can get into a spiral of different conversation points. And I just want to take each question
Yep.
and try to have answers or discussion points on that question.
Absolutely.
So the first question is around what data points
Yep.
were taken, and or, need to be discussed. So.
Yep. So when the committee went through the process, we first started with a data overview with Chris Malloy, our data person, who came in and gave us a nice historical analysis of our STAR data, our forward data. I keep trying to call it WKCE, which just dates me. And the team kind of looked through like strengths and weaknesses, like what are we seeing as patterns across time with that? One thing that stuck out really was that vocabulary was very low comparatively across the district in many different measures. And so that was definitely an area that the team was interested in. When you talked about using a rubric, we were using the rubric from the state that walked through each one of those areas in the reading, science of reading piece. It also very closely aligned to the literacy training that our teachers had gone through. We did also add some local pieces to that as well, taking a look at, for instance, how might this work in our eCampus setting? How might this work with our dual language? How might this work with multi-age? Knowing that there are some local pieces to each curriculum adoption that we have to consider. When we were going through the process, we had the teachers rate the curriculum, and I will talk specifically about the final 2 that we were piloting based on those different features. One of the absolute strengths of the HMH Interreading was the vocabulary instruction, kindergarten through 5th grade. And our teachers, knowing that that had been a weakness, felt pretty excited about that, knowing that that would be the data piece. I know you asked about like comparative data, and I think that's a good question. I would say typically as a part of a pilot process, even if it extended longer than the amount of time that we did it, it would be really, really hard to do sort of like a scientific process with it. And like where you would say, okay, these two groups of kids are using two different sets of curriculum. Let's give them the STAR assessment at the beginning. Let's give them the STAR assessment at the end. And whoever grew the most, that's the curriculum that we're gonna go with. There are so many factors that would be almost impossible to control in a situation like that, that I don't know that we would find a researcher that would say like, yep, that makes some sound sense and be able to make those decisions. What the companies do is they do sort of their own research, and we take a look at those pieces, certainly when we're making that decision. But to sort of have like a perfectly designed sort of scientific experiment, if you will, with those two pilots, I think would be hard. I see you shaking your head, so I just want to make sure that I'm getting at what you were
No,
asking.
well, I mean, clearly there would have to be some other means by which you're believing that this is an effective tool in the classroom to be able to recommend that for board recommendation, one over the other.
Mhm.
So I'm not hearing that. So far, the comparative data that was used, I hear is from historical information as far as where we saw some opportunities and fell short. But that's a case for moving forward with a curriculum review process. It's not a case for which selection you made. So then also the HMH vocab instruction. Well, where is the comparative data? Where is that chart that lines everything up and says, okay, this is where wit and wisdom fell short on the vocab instruction and why? That I'm not hearing.
Sure. And I can kind of jump down to what I heard is your last concern, specifically about wit and wisdom.
Yeah.
And I do want to address that because I want to make sure that I'm clear about this. When the state made their process for approval of the different sets of materials, wit and wisdom on its own would not have met that criteria. Wit and wisdom used as a standalone would not have met that criteria.
How so? And that's, again, that's another reason why I feel like that was missing from the presentation. And that should have been something that I felt should have been presented to the board as to why wit and wisdom fell short in that particular area. I didn't feel that I received that information in an adequate form. So.
Yeah, no, I understand and I appreciate that. I always struggle, honestly, with how many details should I share and how many should I not? I mean, this was a process that involved like dozens of our teachers and tons of meeting time, and I am super passionate about this, and I could talk to you about this for like hours. And if I could talk to you about this for hours, they could talk to you about it for like days and weeks. And so
I'm sure we could.
I'm always trying to like cliff note, to throw it back to the 90s, like what we're doing. And I appreciate that sometimes that in that I don't get into every nitty gritty detail of the process. And so going back to wit and wisdom, as a standalone, wit and wisdom would not have met the sort of state standards. Because this is strictly, Act 20 is, I shouldn't say strictly, is very closely tied to those early literacy instruction. Wit and wisdom as a standalone does not meet that criteria. And so wit and wisdom partnered with a couple of other companies. Now, Geodes is their own company, and Geodes is what provides the controlled readers, if you will. And then they also paired with something called Really Great Reading, which would provide more of the phonics, phonemic awareness instruction, K-3. One thing that we heard loud and clear from our teachers is that the current materials that we are using is something that we have worked very hard to sort of pull many resources together to create a core curriculum. So we're using Fontes and Pinnell Classroom, Jolly Phonics, Heggerty, Lucy Calkins writing, like I could add many things together. And from that, our coaches have created a pacing guide. Our teachers made it very clear that it was difficult when it wasn't just one set of materials that we're pulling from. And one of the concerns about Wit and Wisdom was that we would have to be pulling from different resources, and those things aren't necessarily as correlated. So the geodes, which are the decodable readers, only offered one book per week, which our teachers didn't feel like was enough volume of reading. They were having to use something else called Really Great Reading that only went through third grade. And if we were trying to create cohesiveness K-5, that would be a problem because we'd have to pull a different resource for fourth and fifth grade. And so there were concerns from the when we brought together all of the curriculum resources that made it such that it didn't feel like a set of materials that was going to be a fit for our elementary school as it related to Act 20. I very much appreciate your point about creating a more cohesive K-12 process. It's something that I share with you, that we need to be thinking about how do these things fit together from when a student starts with us when they're 4 years old in kindergarten, 4K, and continue with us until they graduate at 18. And it's something that I feel like is a large priority. And I've already started some discussions about how can we make that work and how can we make that fit. We were in a setting where we had done some curriculum review processes with our ESSER dollars that were available that felt quick because we had those dollars to spend and we had a strong need in our buildings. What I am looking forward to is taking a breath and starting to tie all of those pieces together. And I truly think that some of the work that we'll do with the policy committee will help us with that. I think the work with our coaches will help us with that. And I don't mean to diminish those concerns because I certainly share those concerns about making sure that we have a cohesive program K-12. For instance, in math, we use different curricular materials throughout the system, but they're all based on the Wisconsin state standards, and making sure that we're tying those together as a student moves through the system is very important to me, and that will be important to me here too.
So, I heard a lot, about the different materials that you have tried to pull together, when it comes to, trying to find the resources here and there to fill in any particular voids. Some of the names you brought up were the Lucy Calkins, Fontes and Pinnell, which actually were authors and creators of the three queuing process, which we're trying to get away from. That's a concern.
That's part of our urgency.
Yeah, okay. And I understand that aspect, that it's something that I feel like no matter what we do, there's going to be an improvement. However, are we making the best decision for the entire process? When you say standards, who sets those standards? DPI, right? So when we're taking a look back at, okay, what is the best decision for our district? That might be different, because if the state standards, I mean, what is required of Act 20 versus DPI? Because, you know, if you're pre-Act 20, DPI was telling us to go forward with the free queuing process. So DPI doesn't have all the answers either. So what's going to be on the forward exam? Why do we need to move forward with what DPI tells us to? And why wouldn't we also look at more information about how it's helping our students later on? And that vertical alignment is a pretty critical piece to me, you know?
So Craig, if I can, just want to make sure that we have all the facts, right.
Okay.
DPI, was working hand in hand with the legislature to bring Act 20 forward.
Okay,
Okay, so, they saw also the need to make a change in, reading curriculum and how we approach reading for students. Okay, and I think as a nation, we see that movement happening. And I do think that there will be changes in state exams, not only here in Wisconsin, but, all over our nation as we approach reading in a different fashion. So, you're right that, that DPI and other states were in other places and that they do create those standards. Whether or not the standard has to change or how we approach the standard, still remains kind of the discussion point as we're entering into a new phase of teaching reading, through the science of reading approach, right? We're trying to make sure that we align to all of that. But I just want to make sure that you're clear that DPI has been on board with this change, and they see the need for that change. It's not, a difference between the legislatures here and the DPIs here. They're working together on this.
sure, and then it still comes back to, it has been said that, other curriculum hasn't aligned with the state standards. Which standards and why? That's kind of part of the process that I feel the board should know. If we as a board have made a curriculum selection and with wisdom at the middle school level, and there was a mistake made or perhaps not, why are we deviating from that? That should really be the crux of the presentation then. Like, why do we feel we need to do things in this particular fashion? Because that, again, was a very rigorous process. And I feel, without due diligence in that aspect, we're not giving it, the credit it deserves, or we made a mistake.
So you're suggesting in the future that, when we start tiering out, ones that don't go to the next step in the process, having more of a conversation about how and why those were, set aside and didn't go into the piloting process, which was the next step. Because we had a material review process that reviewed all of them, right? And then some made it to a pilot process and some went on the shelf. What you're saying is, having had more communication to the board about what that is and what the determinants were is something you'd like to see in the future. And wish was part of this, but it wasn't, right?
Right.
Is that what I'm hearing you say?
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, it's definitely, yeah, the major part.
Yeah, because I mean, I'm sure we can go back and share that with each one of those, right? Because Diana was part of that process. I was here that day, as you guys went through those materials and discussed which ones you wanted. And you had a couple of times where, Desha, you came back and, with other questions and did some more thorough research. And so there was a rigorous process by which they did that. They just didn't share that with you. They said, we went through these, here's the two we'd like to pilot. And the committee said, go forth and conquer, right? But what you're saying is you would like a better pause next time, and probably would have liked it on this one, but it didn't happen.
Yeah.
I mean, if you want, we could go back to that step and they can share the why these two went forward and these didn't, if that helps you.
I think it would help me personally, but I mean, I also feel like, if we're going to, I mean, I know it's hard to say that we can't come up with any like particular scientific data, collection process. I find that challenging to accept that we're, I need to understand the criteria. Maybe that's just me as an analytical person that way.
Can I share why it's difficult? When you're piloting, right, you're really just implementing. And so the reason it would be hard for us to discuss how students did or the students' experience was within that is it's not like these are professionals who've been in the material for 3 years. They understand it really, really well, and they understand what and how to get the best out of it, right? They're struggling with just learning the material, looking at the material themselves, and seeing roughly what that experience looks like in the classroom. And that implementation phase, it's really hard to collect real hard data about whether or not on the learning side, it's really, really beneficial, right? And so we have to look at other factors about, your experience through the materials as a teacher, ease of use of it, connections that it makes within the material itself, connections it makes to the standards. Those are some of the things that we have to look at versus hard data on did students improve or not.
But to a board member, if that information isn't shared with you, how am I supposed to understand that that actually was what was done and what was expressed, if that information hasn't broken down and been shared with the board?
Agreed. That's where Ms. Boris said, hey, in my editing, I know what you're looking for more now moving forward, especially, but where I'm struggling with this is if that's what board members needed along the way and weren't getting, we're at the end of a process and actually after a vote of a board. And I do believe that having this more thorough conversation that night might have helped. But we're learning from the process, and part of the process was truncated and very focused because of a state law. It wouldn't be the normal process we would put together. And it certainly would have probably been a more elongated process. And also knowing where you are and maybe where board members are now, as we move forward with processes in the future, taking our time to cover those exact things for you in more detail. We can appreciate that from you as a board. There are other boards we don't need to hear that. Then actually there are other board members on the board that made this decision who were like, we don't really care to hear that. We trust where you're going with this, and here's what you're telling us.
Yeah, unfortunately, I don't share that philosophy.
I agree. Right. You made that very clear.
Craig, can we get to the last question about the dual language?
Sure.
Thanks.
Can I just add one piece quick in that we do have a committee, norm, whatever. We say we're going to trust the work of our committees. We had a committee design. We had a process design. We had a board member, myself, on the committee that had kind of gone through there to get into some of the nitty gritty. So the higher level things are those which come back to the board. So the way the process was established and went through both the math curriculum adoption and this early literacy curriculum adoption, it went through the process by which it's established. Now, I'm hearing Craig loud and clear, and I understand where he's coming from about wanting or desiring to change the process. But I think we have to remember we followed the process as it was designed, as it was intended. So to go back right now, I just hope we're not reopening all of this, because I look at how many hours the teachers have put into this, the committee work has put into this, the students. When you pilot something, you're moving a little bit away from your ordinary everyday kinds of things. There's a lot of things affected when we went through the process. I asked questions that were there. I asked any questions that came to me. There were no questions that came from board members. So I think we just really need to be careful in moving forward. If we're going to change the process, I have no problem with that moving forward, having that discussion. But to change the process looking backward and ask the teachers to go through all of that again, I caution us against that.
Thanks, Diana.
Okay, the dual language piece. When we went into this process, and I want you to know how seriously and carefully we look at these things. This is not a flippant decision that is made without time, effort, and energy by a lot of people.
I never said
Okay,
that.
I just want to
I
be super
realize-
clear about
I
that.
realize that that's.
Okay. And I also want to say, you and I share, and we share that we want what's best for our kids and in our district and for our teachers too. So I see that we are aligned in that, and I want to be able to address the concerns that you have. When we went into this process, we knew that some of the materials may or may not have supporting materials in Spanish. I knew that no matter what, we were going to pick the best set of materials for our kids. And I knew that I was probably going to have some pretty difficult conversations along the way with a variety of stakeholders based on how that worked out. And I was not afraid of having to have those conversations. I knew that we had to make the best decision for our students at the end of the day. I don't want anyone around this table to think that there were materials that we just didn't even look at because they didn't come in Spanish. If that was the case, we wouldn't even have brought them in when we had our very first day where we were analyzing them. I remember scheduling that day and we had, you know, a lot of teachers here, and I remember it was packed from like, I think we started at like 7:30 in the morning and I think maybe we left here at 5 o'clock at night. In fact, I remember Sarah Duncan had a fiscal meeting and I felt terrible because it was a disaster in here because we had so many things. If I had been able to eliminate any sets of those materials to make that day more reasonable for our teachers, I certainly would have done that. But we wanted to give a fair shake to all the materials, whether or not those materials came in Spanish. And so I don't want anyone to think like, oh, immediately got crossed off the list because those materials didn't come into Spanish. That was certainly not the case. I knew that we had to pick the materials that were going to be the best materials for our kids. I do want to address, when we are talking about our HMH into literacy, I want us to revisit the fact that the state law came into place because of early literacy instruction in particular. We made the decision as the board to pause on rapidly implementing a set of materials because the law went into place that the materials were to be used at the beginning of the 24-25 school year. And instead made the decision that we believe in our teachers. We believe that we need to train them so that they understand what we're looking for in those materials. And that's why we invested so heavily in that Keys to Literacy. When we did the deep dive and examination of the materials that at the end of the day we chose felt like the best fit with that training that we invested with for our teachers. And I know these folks over here would be able to give you a very in-depth discussion as to all the pieces of the early literacy. And essentially taking a 5-year-old who is learning their letters to a 10-year-old, 11-year-old at the end of 5th grade that is a fluent reader who comprehends the materials. And I know they'd be more than happy to do that right now. I don't know if you want that or need that in the interest of time. Dan, I know you got to drive to Nebraska today. One of them can hop in the car with you for the next 8 hours and give you a deep dive if you're interested.
Thank you.
But I want to address that concern in particular about the Spanish set of materials. I don't want anyone to think that we would diminish the overall quality just because they came in Spanish.
But again, this is where you get into, is where like, we're talking about the merits of this particular curriculum selection. We're not talking about any other, it goes down to the criteria of comparative. And I think that when we're making a selection, one over the other, again, as a board member, I need to understand more of the comparative analysis. Otherwise, it's just, hey, we think this is a great one, take a recommendation. Why?
Yeah.
Why, where did Wit Wisdom fall short in that respect? You know,
Speak to that, Jenny.
Yeah, can you speak to that at all? Or are we allowed to? I'm sorry.
it's up to the chair.
Well, no, you've been here for a while. Go ahead and ask. Yeah, man.
So, yeah, we went through the DPI crosswalk tool with about 8 different curriculums in one, in a day, and then we took notes, and then we kind of pieced things out. And there was some curricula fell short just for reasons of didn't have enough phonics, or didn't use the most recent instruction sequence for phonics, or the module topics were not appropriate for kids. We had one curriculum that was really strong, but we never had an adult reading a book to a kid. All you were doing was showing slides, or you were holding a poster to kindergartners. And we felt like, no. Kids need to see adults reading books to them. That was like a rule breaker for us, right? So when we look at like written wisdom, we liked some of the things we saw, but that phonics piece was kind of the deal breaker for us, because we would have to supplement with something else, and it would only go K3. And then that whole decodable piece that Jenny kind of mentioned, we're kind of doing that now because of the prohibiting of queuing systems. So we're kind of photocopying decodables, we're buying decodables, and we're trying to match them up to this really strong phonics scope and sequence at K1, and our teachers have spent a ton of time trying to make that work. And they really couldn't stomach doing it again with another curriculum. And then for interreading, they had this what we call structured literacy piece. So they have a phonics instructional sequence that matches very well with what we call Orton Gillingham, which is a really well-known approach to teach dyslexics. And some of this Act 20 push is on that, how do we support children who are struggling to read? How do we support those dyslexic children in the core curriculum? And that matched beautifully K5. In fact, it was the only curriculum that matched K5 to that piece. The other piece about interreading is kind of the unknown piece of comprehension. We're so focused on phonics with Act 20, but there's that whole other part of being able to understand what we read. And we felt Interreading did a really great job with their anchor charts, their mini lessons. They're using research based on a woman named Kylie Beers, who kind of teaches comprehension, just not assessing comprehension with a graphic organizer or a worksheet or a test. But how do you get kids, when they can read fluently, but don't understand, how do we help kids understand, like, hey, there's little signposts that authors use to help you understand what you're reading, and you gotta notice those. It's called metacognition. And our kids don't get that sometimes. So we really felt like this was a company that was looking at both pieces, because we know we need both. And right now the focus is on the phonics piece, obviously, but this one did both and built the vocabulary in a great way. We liked what we saw with the decodable readers, especially for our kindergarten and first graders, because we have to be able to engage them in books that they want to read, and not just being able to read, like reading CBC words or a few high frequency words. And it also, as Jenny mentioned, really didn't mesh well with those instructional approaches that we had learned through Keys to Literacy.
So I like your explanation. I think that that would have been something I would have liked to hear at the board level. One thing I still struggle with, we're talking about supplement.
Yeah.
And right now, my concern is the focus on supplementing material at the art, not needing to supplement material at the elementary level. But when it comes to that transition from elementary to middle school, there's going to be a supplemental need there. So there's a trade-off somewhere. Where is that discussion? Like, how come that discussion wasn't had or part of that process? It seemed like it wasn't. I can't, because of, you know, the lack of the middle school being involved. And I think that we don't wanna like suffer in one area because we realize there's a shortfall in another, you know, that's my concern.
Yeah, Craig, I can agree with your concerns, and I think we understand that next time we need to do a better job earlier, right? Wouldn't you say?
I guess that would be a factual statement.
Okay, Diana, Sam? Anything else?
I agree with what you said. I think it's really a matter of looking at what we're gonna do in the future. There might, we should have a discussion about this at the full board. I think the way I would look at it is you can have the best water in the world, but if it's running through the pipes in Flint, Michigan, circa 2014, you probably got to have a discussion about what you're going to do to make sure that the water is safe to give to your kids. So I think there's a number of aspects there with many of the great points that Craig is bringing up. But I really do think that that's best served talked about as a full board. And because we're kind of coming into the discussion far down the line with a different board makeup and all those things, I don't know that it's best served with the limited number of people that we have here, board members that we have here at this time.
Are you clear on what our action items would be, or?
So
Future
what I am understanding, and please correct me if I'm wrong, is that we are talking about processes in the future and ensuring that processes in the future are transparent, and that we work through an opportunity to have K-12 input in those processes. I guess I am looking for direction as to moving forward in particular right now. I will be honest with you and tell you that we have a fairly small window where I have communicated to teachers about potential professional development dates. I am anxious about the idea of starting a process over potentially. I know our teachers were very invested in this process. And I very much appreciate your point, Craig, about trade-offs. I am never going to sit here and tell you there is absolutely one set of materials that is perfect. If there was one set of materials that was perfect, I would hope that I wrote them and that I was able to profit from them across the country. But the reality of the situation is there's going to be no set of materials that are absolutely perfect. I think built into our process, it's incredibly important that in the future, we're always looking at the data. I very much appreciate the contributions that Chris Malloy has been able to bring. I know we have been analyzing data as it relates to our math implementation, our ELA implementation at the middle school as well, so that we are further refining what we are doing. And I appreciate that. My concern about, at this point, pausing, like I said, I've communicated to teachers potential professional development date and times at even as soon as the end of May, potentially over the summer. And I need to be able to provide them clear direction. I also would have concern about, we talk a lot about collective teacher efficacy in school. Like if our teachers believe that they can do it, it's the biggest factor in having our kids be successful, and having teacher input into this process to me is very important. Having teacher voice heard is very important to me. And if we go back to the drawing board, it would be important for me to figure out how to ensure that our teachers' voices are heard in that process as we move forward. And so I'm worried about any delay sort of interrupting not only our professional development schedule, getting our materials in to start the school year on September 1st, as well as ensuring that we have our teacher buy-in as we move forward with that. So what I'm hearing is there are pieces about this process that members of the current board feel like they are struggling with, including time frame, transparency, the K-12 involvement, items with the curriculum company that are somewhat out of our control. And I don't know what I just did. Okay, I think I stopped the share. I was trying to admit someone. And just when we are outlining our processes moving forward, making sure that we are including those pieces in it. But moving forward with our current board approved adoption. Is that what I'm hearing from our committee?
Additionally, a strategic discussion about this Act 20 plan, HMH into reading, and where we stand, but as a full board.
a strategic discussion specifically about how we're addressing Act 20.
About HMH into reading and how we're going to move forward with HMH into reading, considering the various concerns that have been brought up.
So I'm hearing two
What does
different
that mean?
things, I think.
One discussion is about what we're gonna do in the future. The other discussion is what are we gonna do? What are we gonna do in the future as far as how we adopt curriculum and the process by which we do that? The other one is about, which we're already having a discussion about through policy. The other one is about what we're gonna do with HMH into reading as it stands right now, because we're obviously very, very, very far along in that process.
So what does that mean to you? Does that mean like, how are we going to implement this with fidelity? Considering the questions we've had with it?
Yeah, and what's the best way that we can implement it or adjust it as needed?
Okay.
And timing on that discussion, I just would be concerned about being able to pull together something that would be meeting the needs of the board by the May board meeting. Is it something that we could potentially discuss in June, or is this something that's more
So
urgent that we would need to?
I guess what I'm hearing from the committee right now is, and tell me if I'm wrong, we're far enough down the track, and there were certainly some concerns brought up by the board. They want to plan for how are you going to address those concerns as we're moving forward with this curriculum.
Yeah, I think I'm
So-
missing a piece here because we voted on this in March,
I
correct?
agree, but there was an ask for a pause for the discussion that didn't happen. And I said, you know, hey, I'd like to have that discussion. So, I mean, we're actually in a better place after today's discussion because there are some concerns about, you know, how does this fit into the middle school?
Yeah.
We're going to have to be very cognizant of that and talk about what we need to make sure that that transition really happens, especially if it wasn't discussed during the process, right? And so we're trying to account for some of those things as we pull this piece forward. I understand, and I'm happy that we've had the conversation, so that way we don't move forward without addressing those things. And then people say, "Well, I wasn't happy with this selection in the first place," you know, and having that issue maybe for the next 10 years,
Mhm.
right? Taking the concerns that you have about, you know, DEI and having a thorough walkthrough from the board level through those materials to talk about how are we going to either work with those lessons, omit certain things or whatever else to make sure that it's what our community needs.
Yeah.
You know, from the standpoint of we've chosen these and now we need a thorough dive into them to make sure that part is clear is good, because I don't want 3 years down the road, some people saying, hey, listen, you bought this, you knew it, and you didn't do anything. Right?
Exactly, yeah.
And I can say, no, we did. Our board went through a deep dive and we walked through with teachers and we took out the things that we thought were important to take out and everything else. So I'm really happy to have had the conversation now
Mhm.
that could have been had before we actually pushed the yes, let's go button.
Mhm.
But we can account for those and we can move forward and feel good about how we move forward. And listening to the concerns that we have and where you are as a board and possibly a new board at our next meeting to talk about how this board can give guidance to those people who are working on those policies for curriculum adoption can be strengthened, and our curriculum process adoption can be strengthened, is going to be a really good thing for us to tackle at the next board meeting.
Yeah.
So I'm really happy with the outcome of today because we're very clear on where we need to move forward. It sounds like we're moving forward, making sure the materials get going, and then having those, at least those two big deep sets of dive into it with the you know, the DEI piece and the transition between middle school. And then also having a deep dive on how do we control for a better process in the future, I think are all good solutions.
Yeah.
So.
Sure. Okay, that makes a little bit more sense. You give me a little bit more context on where this conversation is coming from and what the purpose of this conversation was. So understanding that there was that request for the pause and we're okay.
Yeah,
Thanks.
Did that help?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Completely. I have a much better understanding of it. Yeah.
Good. Thank you for being here. And We're going to eCampus contract renewal. Bob, you have 2 minutes.
We have 2 minutes. No, that's not true.
Since we have folks here.
We only planned a minute, so that allow Q and A. I appreciate it. I always start with the intro and I always begin with gratitude, so I just want to thank the members of the board for your continued support of learning and teaching. It's very much appreciated. I also want to thank the members of eCampus that are here today and larger eCampus learning community. They've spent hours gathering feedback, talking about what are the strengths of eCampus, where there might be gaps, and how do we close those gaps as we move into the future. So their leadership is very much appreciated as well. I'd like to pause here. We have 3 guests here to help present, and just let them introduce themselves, please.
I'll start. I'm Tracy Colchison. I am the lead teacher of eCampus Academy. I joined in 2020 and
I'm Anthony Moss. I'm the governance board president. My day job is president of Moss Brothers Construction in town. I'm Bob Logan. I'm the supervisor of digital learning and technology for the district. And I began the eCampus process of 2016 and chartered in 2020.
Thank you. I think it's important to note that and I think our team believes that education is not one size fits all. And I think you'll see through our why, what, and how, and some of our conversations about eCampus that eCampus provides an opportunity for students for us to be really reactive to students' passions, interests, and also forward thinking and talk about future. We want to be time travelers with the eCampus students, get them thinking about what's the future and how do we support that effort. I think it's also important to know that we talk about innovation at eCampus a lot, and we find that connected to our strategic plan. I think in many ways, eCampus, Endeavor, our charter schools are really embracing innovation in ways that we should be celebrating. Today is just one step in the process to take a look at our eCampus contract. I think we began this process in January. We had an open session at the public library for anyone that wanted to learn more about eCampus, to give us feedback about what they saw as strengths in eCampus, and then what they thought might be gaps in eCampus. That was really the kickoff of our contract renewal process. Each step along the way, we've gathered feedback from different stakeholders. We started really large, an open session available to anyone, and now we're gotten tighter and tighter. That process has ended, or not ended, but the most recent step was with our board governance crew last week, where they took a look at this contract, gave us some feedback, and over the last 6 months, 5 months, the steps along the way is where we're at with this contract now. Those steps included getting feedback from our charter school representative from DPI, as well as our attorney. So that's what we're bringing forward today with that contract. Today, we really want to dig into our why, what, and how. The contract is linked, but we really want to just give you the why, what, and how. And if you certainly have questions about the contract, we'll answer them. But that's what we'll really focus our attention, and then we'll give you an opportunity for questions and answers. DPI has an expectation for all contracts to be renewed by June. And so we hope that this could be on the May full board agenda for consideration and ultimately approval, which would be a month prior to the deadline. I'd like to turn it over to President Moss. He's been working with Endeavor and eCampus for more than 12 years. As he mentioned, he is currently president of our governance board, and he's here to share some historical perspectives, words of wisdom, he said, and other perspectives in general. So thank you.
Not about words of wisdom. Yeah, I'll keep this brief. I'm really here to lend my support, again, as Jason noted, with Endeavor, starting 12 years ago, and then eCampus along the way here. I don't live education day to day. In fact, I don't even have any children. I'm a 1997 graduate of Watertown High School. So I guess I'm probably, no pun intended, old school. A little bit more of the curriculum. Here it is, regurgitated back to us, passed the test. Endeavor and eCampus in their own ways with the project-based learning, individual learning plans with eCampus. It's just very eye-opening how education has changed, I think, for the better. And I graduated from Watertown High School, and I graduated from MSOE in 2002. So I saw some innovative education techniques there, but really, I think when you're talking about soft skills and putting kids in a position where they have to be responsible for their own time management, developing their own lesson plans. These are really the skills I think you take beyond school. I mean, I went through Watertown, I went through MSOE. What I could actually tell you about the curriculum of the specifics that I learned, I forgot much of it a long time ago. It's really kind of learning how to learn. And I think both Endeavor and eCampus are really, really strong in those capacities. So, I mean, the other thing I would say is that I think a lot of communities, when you have these charters or schools like that, it's sometimes driven from parents that are, or community members that are dissatisfied with the local school district. Whereas like this really started from like passion projects from your own staff, your own administration, which carries on to this day, and I can really see it and how passionate they are, and that carries over to when they mentor their kids in these schools going forward. So I'm a strong proponent of it, and I just wanted to be here to I guess lend my support, if not wisdom.
Thank you very much. I'm gonna turn us back over to our why, what, how, and as we put this together, it's really twofold. It's the why of eCampus, but it's also the why of the contract renewal, and that's a common theme throughout this document. And so I'll talk us through the why, and then I'll turn it over to Bob for some of the details around the what. And so never want to read things to folks, but what you see here in our why is starting with our mission and vision of eCampus. And I've highlighted some words that really stand out to me and I find powerful. And I'm guessing you'll find a common theme across these words. The first in the mission is a couple words here at the beginning is really identifying student interests and passion. We take time at eCampus to really delve into and learn our students and find out what those passions and interests are in what you see in the latter part of that mission statement, the development of a personal growth and learning plan. It's based on what students want to learn, may have strengths in, also knowing that we have to hit some standards as well, but it's really tailored to the individual. Turning it over to the mission, the vision, some keywords that speak to me is really it's a partnership between parents, students, and community, and certainly our district. I think it's important to note that we are leveraging digital tools, right? eCampus is primarily a virtual school, but not exclusive to virtual, but we're leveraging the many digital tools available to our learners. And also circled here, relevant learning experience. Again, it's like playing into the interests and passions of our students, and then empowering those students to really thrive and be prepared for as President Moss mentioned, life after our school. I think the next paragraph is really a culmination of our mission and vision. It's just a reminder that eCampus has really allowed or afforded the opportunity to be flexible for our students, allowing our students to demonstrate mastery, future readiness in a way that really emphasizes student agency. We want our students to take ownership of their learning journey, and with our adults there to serve, support, guide, and ensure success. We do this in a way that's virtual, certainly. It's competency-based at times, but it's certainly real-world applicable. I think last night at policy, we talked about instrumentality. Just don't want to assume that with anything, but instrumentality just means that it's part of our school district versus a third party that's supporting it. And then the last piece here, bottom paragraph of our why is really the renewing of this contract. Ensures that our students, families and district continues to have access to these opportunities afforded through eCampus. And certainly, we have students, as you well know, from Watertown proper, but also across the state of Wisconsin, as well as internationally. So with that, I turn it over to Bob for some chat about our what.
So as you know, eCampus Academy is the Watertown Unified School District's public virtual charter school. We serve students from 4K through 12, and we aim to offer flexible, personalized learning experiences through virtual, blended, and site-based opportunities and models. And we design that to meet students where they're at and help them to grow towards mastery and future readiness. We do this by building off of 3 foundations that we believe strongly in. Part of our charter is giving flexibility to do things in a little bit different way. The first one is customized learning plans. We try to meet every student where they're at. The students co-create their personal learning plans with their learning team, and those plans are tailored to their interests, goals, and learning pace. So there's no 2 students in eCampus that have exactly the same pathway to get towards their future. Second pillar is learning profiles or learner profiles. We work really hard to get to know each student as an individual. The instruction is guided by each student's unique academic, social, emotional, and personal strengths. And we like to say that there's no one size fits all in eCampus. The third pillar is competency-based progress. Jason touched on that. Here students advance by demonstrating their mastery, not simply by serving a seat time sentence. This allows for autonomy and deeper learning. And we do this because we believe that the best opportunities in life are earned through competence and not simply just showing up. We believe that engagement is the #1 predictor of success in any venture, especially academics. So we facilitate learning through a myriad of opportunities and experiences that students can engage in, ranging from virtual classes to cross-curricular workshops and seminars, to project-based learning, career and college pathways supported by local technical colleges, UW-Whitewater, and industry partnerships that we have. And students are also able to participate in up to 2 WHS in-person classes. And what this means for WSD, we provide an opportunity to retain students who might otherwise open enroll into other virtual or traditional schools. As soon as a student seeks to open enroll out, we are contacted by central office to reach out to them. And we've managed to retain scores of students over the years who would otherwise have left the district. We have an opportunity to increase enrollment for the district through recruiting new students through open enrollment, specifically in homeschool and parochial settings, but also from students from around the state, as Jason mentioned. We can provide access for families whose needs are not fully met by traditional models due to health concerns, inevitable in society. And we also are able to support alternative learning pedagogies for students who may struggle in a more traditional setting. We believe that renewing eCampus charter is a strategic and student-centered decision. We believe it strengthens WSD's ability to serve all learners, retain enrollment, and offer families meaningful, future-ready educational opportunities that meet every student where they're at and move them towards a future that is designed by them. And I'm going to hand over the how to Tracy.
Okay, so the problem going last is sometimes maybe the points I was going to hit have already been touched on. But I'm going to talk a little bit just about the day-to-day nuts and bolts of eCampus, and then just how the charter contract is governed, reviewed, and when it comes time, renewed. So as Bob and Jason were talking about, we are definitely a school that values and defines the way we work through personalized learning. And they mentioned that we have a graduation plan, our personalized learning plan, which is based and really centered around their learning profile. And this learner profile is not just academic data, but it really tells us a lot about who they are, what they care about, where they excel, where they need support. And the profile really evolves with them and is constantly changing as their academic path sometimes changes and their self-awareness as learners change. This really helps, this process helps honor our mission, which is to help students identify their passions and design a future that they're very much excited about. They engage in a variety of learning experiences. We are primarily an online school, so we have platforms such as Alice, which is an adaptive math platform. And we also have our main LMS, which is called Schools LP, and that's what houses all their coursework for their online coursework, which is highly customizable. And as Bob was saying, everything looks different for almost every student in some ways. And so this allows the teacher to go in and really meet the needs of that particular student. We also do offer project-based experiences when appropriate. And we've had some pretty exciting things take place working with local businesses, working with businesses from Madison. One of our projects was to create, work with a tech business to create a chatbot. And the students informed them what they would need in a chatbot for a personalized learning platform. And they got worked with business people from across the state and the world. And they said, this is what it's like to be an adult in a meeting. I'm like, ooh, yes. You'll get used to those in life. But they really got some amazing experience out of that. We also have internships, online seminars, and online field trips and in-person field trips, as well as we try to also give those types of experiences where they can come face to face with their peers and get to build community as well. And also every student has an advisor, and that advisor walks with them through their 4 years, well, from the high school perspective, but 4K through 12, their hand is held and there's someone who knows them well. And in respect to then operational oversight, is provided by our governance board, and that includes community members and parent representation. And the board works with the district to make sure we align with district goals, compliance with state laws, and just continuous improvement. As for the contract, governance, we renew every proposing covers every 5 years. So this will be from July 1st, 2025 to June 30th, 2030. And it's a flexible contract, and it can be amended by mutual agreement at any time, and of course, reviewed and renewed again after this term. It includes clear accountability measures, or enrollment drops significantly, and goals are not met, or compliance issues arise. And so the contract really reinforces our shared commitment to high quality, student-centered, innovative education that reflects the values of the Watertown Municipal District. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Just an anecdote, I had Anthony as a student, second semester junior, and I think he'd be a perfect candidate for eCampus had it been offered. He had 1 foot out the door by then.
When Dave asked me to be the president of the board, I asked him, have you checked my transcripts? I said no, so I apparently.
So what was your ACT? You told everybody.
Yeah.
Must have been good enough to get into MSO.
Yeah, let's put it this way, it got me into college.
Well, it was probably 10 points higher than mine, and I was your teacher.
I did have the lowest high school GPA of anyone I knew in college, though, that's for sure. Yeah, late bloomer.
Yeah. All right, Sam?
The only question that I have is a clarification. We've talked about this in the past, but I think it's good for information at least. When we have people enrolling from either outside the district or internationally, what does that mean for our funding? Because it says no tuition for Wisconsin residents. What about out of state and international?
So yes, we can and are allowed to take out of state and international enrollments through eCampus, but they are tuition paid.
Okay.
The tuition, you may think, well, that would be a great, profit source for us. What the reality is, DPI limits the amount, that we can actually charge for tuition. Because, we are a public entity, we can't be profit driven, right? We're not for profit. And so we only can incur actual costs. We talk with those entities about what kind of model they want, which drives our costs or not. Like if they have a local education guide or a local tutor or staff that are helping them in their state or in their country of origin. We talk about what that looks like. We make a plan and we have separate contracts for separate entities that we work with as we bring in those enrollments. But those enrollments do help us. I mean, they don't just detract from where we are. We do make enough of a profit that it helps us to hire the teachers we need to do the administrative work we need and to help them along their journey. So it's a really unique opportunity for us as a school district to say that's kind of a feather in our cap as we relate to that. You know, depending on what we want to do and how we want to move that forward.
For sure. Okay. Yep, that's my only question. I think you answered it very well. That was my recollection the last time we discussed it, but.
I will say that at times our board has asked, you know, do we want to go outside of our state or our local? Is that part of our mission? Right, and so that's a question that we need to continue to hear and discuss and want to talk about as we look at resources and how we allocate them and what we're doing. But I just want to say that that's been a question in the past.
Sure. Yeah, no, that's the only question that I have for now. Like you said, this is kind of the first step in talking about the contract renewal at the moment. Yeah, no, that's everything for me.
Great.
So,
Craig.
oh, sorry, I'm so sorry, I didn't realize your hand was up. And then I felt like you were pointing at the screen, I'm like, what am I missing from the screen?
Dan said Craig and you started in and out. Is that Craig?
So one of the things that is mentioned is as far as the contract ask is regarding goals. It's always been something that I mentioned in the past that I as a school board member, I want to ensure that every child is learning and successful in their journey the best that is possible. I am concerned that I don't always get a chance to see measurables. And when it comes to eCampus, I don't feel like I see a grade level, I guess, reporting of where our children are at grade level. And that's a concern to me, especially when if perhaps take, for example, you have a student that transfers into eCampus. And I know that we're particularly concerned with engagement, you've articulated that. But if that child doesn't engage in class and then starts to come back to the regular classroom, the alternative assessments for the forward applying to eCampus perhaps, it doesn't apply to that student that could be a whole year or two behind, comes back to the classroom, and now they are assessed at the forward exam. So that can actually penalize us for that one particular student or multiple other students that choose to transfer back over to the regular classroom. So my concern is that we should be particularly concerned with and paying attention to how these kids are performing at grade level in eCampus, and that if I'm not sure that that's indicated here as a particular measurable goal as part of the goals process here. Am I missing something?
I can speak to that. On pages, 3 and 4 of the contract, there's some measurables, that will be outlined. I think what you're really speaking to is updates to the board. And Jenny and I have talked about the opportunity for not only eCampus, but Endeavor to come more regularly to Ed Services to provide those updates. And that would begin next year. I think the second part of your question is around, students that are transient. And I would say that we have concerns about transient students, whether it's eCampus to Schurz or Douglas to Webster, right? Any transientness of a student interrupts the learning journey of that student. And I would say 2 things. One is that we are collaborative from an eCampus standpoint with the folks in the schools that they may be going to, and in a way that's really focused on what's best for the student, timing of the transition, the progress that was or was not made during eCampus, how folks at the building can receive that student in a manner that's good for them. And the second thing I would also say is that our eCampus team has been committing time throughout the year to develop some systems. We saw a gap in our systems, to be quite honest. And how we transition students to and from is part of our systems conversation. So we're aware we'll do some pretty good things.
I appreciate that explanation. However, I do feel like some of those particular questions and concerns have been present for quite some time in eCampus's existence. And yet now there's an ask to renew the contract. Yet those answers haven't been provided. I feel like that's putting the cart before the horse. Prove this contract as a formality and we'll get you what you need, even though you've been asking for a number of years. I'm a little bit disappointed in that.
I can only speak to the years that I've been here.
Yeah.
And last year we Ed Services, we did a presentation around eCampus and Endeavor. I forget the month, but we were at the high school. And so we gave an update there. And we're here now and committing to providing those updates regularly moving forward.
I think I've heard that before, but yeah, I'm a little bit. And I'd be happy to have an offline discussion at some point.
For clarification, Craig, you talk about students being evaluated and having data about where those students in eCampus reside. You mentioned the Wisconsin Forward exam or test. That is mentioned under college and career readiness. The goal is 90% of students will demonstrate median to accelerated scale score growth in reading and mathematics on associated district testing metrics. My question is, do they still take those tests at eCampus?
Yes.
Okay, so those are monitored, and then the data would be in WiseDash and on the report card growth measure?
Yes.
Okay, gotcha. So then let me ask you, Craig,
Yeah.
because I'm all about more data, more information. I do like oversight, not necessarily micromanagement, but I do like oversight, and I think it's really important. Do you have any proposals for how we could improve the, I suppose, transparency of the data in that way?
Well, yes and no. First and foremost, if we're going to go from a project, if we have project-based learning, I think this is probably more of a systemic thing within our district. How are we evaluating that from a standards, state standards lens, right? So I'd imagine that there's standardized tests that we would require any child to undergo. That's the same thing with eCampus. And I've always felt like if a child is at a particular grade level, that's where they should be assessed at. And that information would be shared with the board. And you notice that one of the goals is that 90% of median. Well, how are we at that goal? So where are we measuring our success? So far, I'm not sure what success is being reported right now to the board when it comes to the project-based learning in general, but eCampus especially. I'm not hearing a level of success, but I'm not sure that there's a level of success either. And I do know, anecdotally, I've heard of parents that have sent their kids through eCampus and have been successful and have liked eCampus. So, but yes, some of that information should be forthcoming. I don't, like, for instance, if there are forward exam data, what is that? What can be reported to the board?
And so as a follow-up to that then, because it says on here, the growth data will be reported through WiseDash. Do we currently have that growth data available to us if we want to access it through WiseDash? Okay, it's just not something that's been necessarily brought to the board as of late.
Well, I would say that any data set that is brought to the board includes eCampus. And so when Chris Malloy and I presented around the state report cards, that data included eCampus. When we talked about Ames Web data, that included eCampus. And so when we approach, unless it's a specific eCampus presentation, we approach data conversations as every school is part of our learning community, our district, right?
If I may, something that's worked really, really well in a previous school district I was in. If there's questions about oversight and what governs the contract, right? What has worked really, really well in the past is that our school board identifies a liaison to the governing board of those charters. And that liaison then is given all of the information of when that board meets and can sit through the agendas and meetings. I've attended a number of them. I don't even know how many out of the year I've made, but I would say more than I didn't make, right? It might be very, very good for a board liaison to go to those meetings and help report back to the board what's happening at our charter schools. And it'll have a lot better understanding for you as you go to approve these contracts of just what's been going on, the things they've been talking about, how they're looking to improve. Because that governance board is over those charter schools, but does report to you. And that would be a good way to have that connection, I think, a little bit more, something for us to consider as a board.
I also would like to point out at the bottom of the why, what, how sheet, how the contract review and revision works. It does state the third bullet point. The district or governance board may terminate the contract early under specific circumstances. And then as examples, it says insufficient enrollment, failure to meet goals, and non-compliance. So moving forward, even if we do renew it, we can talk about how we're measuring those goals and we can get a clearer picture of those goals being measured. And then if we do find that, and again, I mean, all of my experiences with eCampus and all of the things I've heard have been positive, but I think we could, we can adjust this as we move forward. It's not make a decision today and there's no input on it for the next 5 years.
That's not been my experience.
Okay,
I don't
that's fair.
think that there has been a lot of input after this conversation. When it comes to eCampus moving forward, as far as whether their goals are being met or anything like that.
Well, I would certainly like to increase the amount of input and the amount of discussion that goes on. I'm 100% on board with you there, Craig, and I think that we can make that happen as a board now. So
I think there was at least 2 or 3 suggestions made in today's meeting to get to that point.
yeah. Whether you would like to be the liaison, or you would like to do a subcommittee or something like that, I'm all for it. I mean, it's easy for me to say that if I'm on the I'm willing to be on a subcommittee, or whatever subcommittees people want to make. I've already proposed it like 17 times since 5:30
You're gonna be
yesterday.
busy.
So yeah, I'm fine with it though, man. I'm in for the long haul on that. So if you'd like to work together to come up with a plan between yourself, me, any other board members that are interested, and the eCampus people, I'd love to do that.
Great. We have volunteers and I didn't even ask for any volunteers, so.
Well, we are looking for a recommendation to the board, you know, and whatever that looks like. So if the committee wants to make a recommendation or not to move forward with a contract approval, that would be appropriate, and then that would go forward to the board for discussion and or approval.
Yeah, I'd be willing to make a recommendation for approval, along with an action item to form, I suppose, a subcommittee to discuss eCampus goals and measurement of efficacy. Like,
Just for clarification,
Yeah.
do we want a subcommittee or things that I think about is more frequency to the ed services updating? And as Dr. Burke recommended or suggested, a member of the full board as part of the governance board. Those are options, but either one, I think we need clarity.
you have any preferences on that, Craig?
Well, I mean, if we're gonna have a board member that's part of that governance board, then, there should be some communication back and forth, the board on that as well.
Exactly.
Okay.
That's
So,
just
yeah.
different than a subcommittee.
Yes,
I believe.
yeah, it would just be coming, back through our regular channels, usually ed services, but, that liaison. And I will tell you that, that is a really fruitful position that this board can have with our charter schools. To make sure and ensure, you know, they understand what's happening, if they're not getting enough updates. I mean, it can be a really fruitful position, not only for our board, but for their board to understand where our board is going on certain things, because sometimes their board will talk about, well, where's the school board going? Right? And I find myself a lot of times translating some of what we're doing at the board level to them when it could come straight from a board member. And so I think it's fruitful on both sides. Both boards would, I think, benefit from a liaison position. You know, as you know, not necessarily just oversight, but communication and other things.
So that was your proposal, liaison?
And
More
frequent updates at the ed services meeting.
Yeah, and, you know, if that comes to the board as a recommendation, and that there's a liaison for that position, we'll move forward as a board to see if there's anybody that wants to volunteer for that.
Do we need a second?
I don't wanna just, be voluntold.
Do you agree?
You're it.
We're the only two here. Oh, actually, I'm sorry, Diana, you're online.
Diana's on as part.
Oh, she is.
Did we lose our whole crowd?
All you need is the two of you. I mean,
Okay,
two
I
makes
agree.
a committee, right?
Okay,
So,
yeah, cool.
if you both agree, and you wanna move that forward, then, we'll move that forward to the board with those recommendations
I
to
concur.
create a liaison position and have more
Yeah,
frequent
no.
updates.
Yeah, sounds great.
You know, then, contract approval will go forward with your recommendation with those stipulations. And that's, where we're gonna be.
I'll craft the
Anything else?
resolution.
Thank
Thank
you.
Thank you, Dick.
We did have some additional items that we haven't covered yet. None of these were discussions that felt like there was a movement toward the board. Within director update, we had the added, discussion about, political surveys. And then we did also have the Act 20, data reading plan update. I'm happy to address those now, or if you would like, we can move those to June ed services. I do want to make a note that Mr. Bull is in charge of June ed services. Don't feel surprised.
Somebody's like on vacation.
Because I will be out on that day. I can certainly join virtually if we need to, but I don't know if you want to address those two items now, or if we want to move those to June Ed Services.
As far as the political surveys go, and political surveys is kind of the name we have for it, but I think more broadly, that's like
Survey.
non-academic
Right.
testing surveys. The only thing I would say is we should move to an opt-in model instead of an opt-out model for those. I would like to put that forward to the board for a strategic discussion is what I would think, in the interest of time. In the interest of time right now.
Yeah.
Put that forward to the board for a strategic discussion and then have it, depending on what the board wants, maybe it comes back to policy, in June. What do you think, Dan?
Well, would you say anything differently than you said last night?
I think that other board members would benefit from being able to weigh in on it.
Right, but I mean, they're not here, so at a full board, we would have that discussion.
Exactly,
Okay,
yeah. So that's, just move it forward for a strategic discussion to the full board for them to have, for us to all have a more open discussion about it.
Yeah.
Okay.
The thing within that policy discussion too, that I'm interested in is in the policy that we currently have, it talks about benefit to the district, right? Who makes the call of benefit to the district? Am I to ask a committee to make that call? Am I asked to have the board president make that call? Or do I, as the superintendent, get to make that call? And what does that look like? Because I want to make sure that whoever makes the call, right, is given the authority to make that call.
Yes, I think if we're talking about surveys that are being administered outside of academic testing or academically focused surveys, those things that are required by state mandated, like the ones that we were talking about last night, I really do think that anything outside of that should be opt-in instead of opt-out. That's where I stand on that. I don't think that that's really a discussion about like, is it of benefit to the district? Because I think that you can always make that argument.
I'm not fighting the opt-in or opt-out, right?
Yeah.
I'm saying if we have a study, and I've got one on my desk right now that I've been waiting on. And really, it's an opt-in study. It's being performed by UW. And it's looking at how students translanguage, I can't even say.
Translanguage.
Thank you. Translanguage within their classroom setting. There's no benefit necessarily to the student, but there is some benefit for us as a district to understand the context of how that happens and what the study outcomes come from the UW on what that looks like. And how that would inform our instruction in the future. Some people would say, I don't think that's a benefit. Jared, you think it's a benefit. And the question is who gets to decide what's beneficial or not?
You mean who gets to decide whether or not the survey is even administered whatsoever?
Right, or the surveys or study or whatever. Right?
Yeah.
Because it's more about, it's not just a survey, it's sometimes a study that happens, right?
Sure.
And so that's what this policy covers is those kinds of things. And so I want to make sure that who is ever making that decision of authority of support, right, that they're allowed to make that decision. And currently it's been sitting with the superintendent. What I don't want to get into is a decision where I've said, yeah, and I think there is some benefit to us as what we get back, right? And the board or other people saying, that wasn't worth it, right? That's okay, but it was given the authority for me to determine the worth. And if it's not, if the decision-making process isn't with me, then I want to know who it is with.
Oh, yeah, my initial thoughts, and again, for further discussion at the full board, my initial thoughts weren't necessarily that would change. I don't have a problem with you making those calls. Maybe we would have some specific language in the policy that would be crafted surrounding that, but generally speaking, yeah, that would remain with you. It's just the importance would be the opt-in. At that point, then it's with you, but for each individual student, the decision ultimately rests with the student and the family.
Yeah,
Exactly.
yeah.
So I think that takes care of most of any of the potential issues that.
Yeah,
arise there.
and I agree with that. That clearer language is gonna be good.
Well, we have the president, vice president, and you here now. When you meet regularly, couldn't you take a look at those surveys and
We can.
help make that decision together?
Yeah,
Yeah.
definitely.
Yeah.
It would be helpful. So yeah, that sounds good to me. Let's. The reading plan data update. I personally, because I think that there's some more discussions that need to happen on a larger level, I wouldn't mind just pushing this off until the next
June.
debt services meeting in June. I do think that we've looked at some of this data a few times. I definitely had a chance to examine it beforehand.
If you have questions that could help guide the discussion in June, from your standpoint, getting those sooner than later would be really helpful.
Yeah, definitely. And on my part, I think as far as like the hard skills, the grammar and phonetic education component, I think that all of the materials that I've looked at have been fantastic. My question is about other elements of the curriculum. So as far as that is concerned, I have no doubt that anything that's moving back to a phonics-based reading education is going to show some pretty serious improvements. So I mean, I'm a huge fan of it in that regard.
Thank you. So I'm hearing we'll move the presentation on the data update till June Ed Services. And if there's any particular questions, if you could forward them to us in
Yes,
advance.
100%.
Just knowing that I won't be there, I want to make sure that we are addressing the questions that you have.
Yes.
So what I have, Dan, are we ready for action items?
Yes, we are.
Okay, ready for action items. What I'm taking away from the elementary literacy review update is moving forward with the March board decision, but at some point in the near future, moving it to a strategic discussion at the board level where we're addressing the K-12 implementation continuum piece, as well as any discussion about future curriculum adoption pieces. I do think that will come. Dan and Sam, I did send you some times and dates to meet about curriculum processes. It will come from that as well. Moving the idea of the non-academic survey and or political survey to the full board for a strategic discussion. No action items out of the math third credit update. Then our Act 20 moving to June Ed Services, the e-contract renewal. Jason is going to formulate a resolution for the board that will include approval of the contract as well as a board representative on the eCampus governing board and more frequent updates to Ed Services, and we can kind of talk about what that looks like.
Yeah.
And then Dan, you and I can get together before June as we work to set the June agenda.
Did you, I didn't hear, and maybe it was just me, looking to have a schedule of a deep dive into the curriculum materials once they're here for DEI
Thank you.
types of things,
Yep.
to make sure that we are clear on what our teachers are going to be teaching out of that curriculum piece.
As a
And
part of
that,
that
and that will
strategic
involve
discussion.
board members.
And as in connection to that, one of the things that I touched on very lightly, but to reiterate, getting information on the professional development that was provided to administrators and teachers, the AIM Pathway to Literacy and the Keys to Literacy courses. Some specific information about which courses those were and the contents of those courses, if we can get them up. I don't know exactly how all that works.
Sure.
Thank you.
Yep. And is that just for Sam, or should I send that to Ed Services, or should I send that to the full board?
I don't know.
I never have a problem, as long as the full board doesn't mind getting it. I mean, that's.
Yeah, I mean, usually when a board member requests something, if it's a smaller, quick answer, we answer them back. But if it's something that we think that would be beneficial for everybody, we send it out to everybody. So
Okay.
this might be one of those things that might be beneficial to everybody and may have other people who want to question it.
Yeah.
Or have the same question. So I would send it out to everybody.
If it's gonna be something that might come up as a discussion point in the future among the larger board, then yeah.
Right. Yep.
Okay. All right. I have a little line here that says meeting was adjourned at blank, and it does say AM afterwards, so just for future.
Oh, so we got
reference.
another 2 hours?
Blank AM. I'm calling this meeting adjourned at 9:59, half the time that Sam ran his meeting last night, just.
Wow.
So let's take a look at the agenda from last night. and Let's take a look at the agenda from today.
Let's not have a competition. We did good work
I
in
had,
both.
I measured 45 policies last night. You had 4 items, Sam.
We did good work in both, Sam.